Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here. I was actually just reflecting on the time that we had. And it's so crazy that it was about 2 years ago at this
Wow.
time that we were working together.
Wow.
Um, I believe it was in March, about the time that we started. And
Hmm.
then I want to say it was up until like August or something of 2020, about that time frame.
Wow. So
Um,
actually, right through the onset of the pandemic.
Yeah,
Wow.
exactly. Yeah. Uh-huh. So yeah, I mean, so a little bit about me. My name is Jenny. I am a movement and mindset coach. And it's interesting because someone recently asked, like, why do you say movement and not CrossFit coach or strength coach or whatever it is? And for me, movement has been such a big part of my life, and it's looked so differently throughout my life. When I grew up, my mom was very much, she wanted my brother and I to be active. But what's interesting as I reflect now is I never felt very athletic growing up,
Mm.
but I was active. My mom put us in different things. So, like, I participated, but it's interesting to see how certain movements I felt very uncomfortable and awkward in my body. But then that wasn't the case for all movement because
Mm.
I actually really loved swimming. And what's funny is, so I have this one here with my husband, which is the turtle. And
Hmm.
then on the back, I've got a fish.
Oh, I
And
love
the
it.
fish represents my, childhood sport activity and passion was swimming. And so I loved being in the water. Um, that was the one movement practice, or, that I would call now, that I felt so connected with. I loved being in the water. And I think of how that set me up for, throughout my life. It was interesting to recognize I was active in early childhood, but as I got older into like high school, my activity levels started to change. And then my body started to obviously it started to play a role in my body. What I realized was that having that movement practice where I was so used to having the coach tell me, I
Mhm.
show up, the coach tells me what to do, and I do it. Like, that was great. Once I didn't have that, though, it was like, well, what do I do now?
Yes.
What do I do? I don't even, like, I was so used to swimming that you put me in the gym and I was like, oh, fish out of water. Literally, I was like, what do I do? My my next phase into movement started with stuff, looking stuff up online. I
Cool.
ended up going through and completing, once I went into college, I had a lot of stop and start. Oh,
Mhm.
maybe I'll go into this. Being, I thought I wanted to be a teacher at one point with younger children. I thought I wanted to go into marketing and, like, doing creating, designing shoes. Like, I had so many different things that when I went back into, okay, where's, like, what do I want to go into? I actually found my way back into movement and studied for exercise science.
You mentioned was it a major in kinesiology or is it kind of
Mm-hmm.
the same? Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh,
yep.
cool.
So it was I went for, I finally decided after however many start and stop, that I was going to go into exercise science. And initially, the intention was to go towards somewhat of a physical therapy path
Hmm.
to be able to help people who were, hurt.
Mm.
Then, as I continued through that journey, that's when I found CrossFit.
Hmm.
And it's interesting to see how much CrossFit paralleled the things that I loved about swimming. You have
Oh,
a coach
yes.
that you have your workouts ready for you, and then they guide you through it.
I
Um,
like that you say that because that's exactly what drew me or really captivated me about CrossFit. Like, first of all, they call their people or participants athletes. So you're like, oh
mhm.
yes, I'm an athlete again. And
Yeah.
yeah, you just turn up and you do whatever you're told, but then also you have someone correcting you. So it's not just like, nowadays you get like a training program or whatever. And unfortunately, in many cases, the coach or whatever, if it's through an app, often doesn't see you. So
Right.
I am someone who loves learning, and I
Yeah.
think that's another thing that I really loved about CrossFit at first.
Yeah, definitely. So I was hooked like
Mm-hmm.
from the beginning. And what was interesting too was being able to recognize as I was finding, this love and passion for CrossFit or through CrossFit, what I at the same time I was in school learning about kinesiology, movement, right? Our general movement. And going through some of these classes, let's say exercise physiology or movement anatomy, they especially at that time did not have very nice things to say related to CrossFit. But that was also at the earlier, right? I wasn't at the beginning of CrossFit, but I was towards, it was 8 years ago that I started exploring what that space looked like. So it's definitely really interesting to be in this space, learning from, school, paying for this education, and then also hearing sometimes opposing thoughts from the CrossFit space. Which was really difficult at times when it came to these conflicting ideas around movement and nutrition. Because at school, I'm learning about how carbs are our energy source. And not that CrossFit ever said carbs are bad, but that was essentially right? That's like the underlying message that sometimes you can get around eating clean or paleo.
Well, especially in the early stages. I think now it's actually quite different, and a lot more CrossFitters are like onto macros and rice and all of that is good for you. But in the very early stages, it was more like zone diet, maybe paleo diet, and at best sweet potatoes and fruit, but like minimally.
Literally, yeah. Yeah, definitely. And so I could now, again, I know that was definitely part of my journey and part of the learning process that I got to go through, so that I can now have this new, the way that I'm able to see it now and relate with others to say, oh, but these people are saying I should do this. Those people are saying I should do that. My body feels like this when I do that, right?
Yes.
So it's so interesting now to be able to take the step back and review it from the place of where I'm at now. But really the journey, as it continued to flow, I was very much in love with the CrossFit space. And it was essentially everything, like a whole part of my life, my identity. And as I further continued to explore these different avenues, with nutrition, with movement, with mindset, once I started to explore the mindset piece, I realized that there was something missing around how come I kept experiencing within myself and the people that I was working with in the gym, this up and down cyclical, if you will, process of I'm in it, I'm motivated, I'm ready to go. I see the progress, I celebrate the progress, I get complacent with what I'm doing, and then now I'm back to where I was, or feeling more frustrated. And I felt that myself as well. It was I'm ready to go. All right, no days off sometimes, that whole mindset. And you think, well, I'm doing all of this physical work. I'm eating the clean food. Sometimes I feel good. Sometimes I feel not so great. But I'm not looking like the way that I think I should look.
Oh, interesting. Yes.
Right?
I'm so curious to hear now what your well, I don't want to say conclusion because I'm sure there is not like a definite conclusion, but what you took out of that realization.
Yeah. So as I continued to go into it, what I learned, right, was that a big part of our journey in movement, right, the importance of recovery. that you don't get strong necessarily just by what you do in the gym. You get stronger from recovering from what you do in the gym. In the gym, you're technically breaking things down.
Yes.
Outside of the gym is where you're building things up, right?
Yes.
You sleep well, you manage your stress, you eat proper food that's going to help bring it all together, right? But the mindset piece, you don't necessarily, it's not one piece, it meshes into everything. Oh, and what I've learned was that we sometimes unintentionally add this extra stress on ourselves with this in here. Because our language can either incite, and we don't sometimes we do this unintentionally, right? But our language can influence us for better or for worse.
Oh, heck yes. Yeah.
Right? And when we're thinking about the benefits that we gain from our movement practice through recovery, well, it's not just the you know, the massages and the foam rollers and all that stuff. Like, sure, you can have all of that in check, but if this is not in check, you're in a sense in this constant push, pull, tug of war.
Wow,
and so how many times have you gotten to a point of like, oh, I'm feeling really good, but then something happens where there's this belief around, oh, but I'm likely going to fall off pretty soon if it's not now. And that's sometimes back here. It's not something that you're saying, you know, directly to say, oh, I know I'm going to fall off. But how many times do people say things like, oh, I can never follow through with my diet, or I always end up giving into my cravings, or, you know, right? Like, I can't do this anymore. That in turn adds this pressure that we don't even realize we're putting on ourselves.
Definitely. You're mentioning such a good point that it's most of the negative self-talk, I guess I would say, is subconscious, or like we're not intending for it to like actually self-sabotage. One of my favorite, or well, least favorite words is try, right? Like, you know, it's just basically you're giving yourself not even just the option of a way out, it's basically here's a way out.
Exactly.
Right? Yes.
Yeah, it is. It's a just in case. Just in case I don't, at least I tried. You know? And what's interesting is as I went into and explored the Enlifted Mindset Coaching, now this blends in, is that we actually learn about language patterns.
Oh, cool.
So if you think about our movement, you have a movement pattern, right? If I was to do a squat and I wanted to I wouldn't just go and load a 225 pound squat, right? I want to make sure that I have the mechanics down before I add either the intensity or the load, right? Yeah. And so when we think about some of these things, is like, actually, am I aware of the way that I'm talking to myself about my nutrition? And it starts with just asking the question, like, what is the story that I'm telling myself about historically, right? Up to this point, my nutrition has been like this. But what do I want, right? What do I want? And can I recognize that I have no control over what happened now?
Yes.
All I could do is, from this point, choose how I want to move forward. And sometimes what's interesting is that we don't necessarily consider language and the way that we speak as a movement pattern, but there's actual evidence to support. You can track, like, on with those what is it, the EMG or
electrodes or whatever,
right? They can track where a thought pattern starts and stops.
Wow.
And just like, you know, when we do a certain movement and you're ingraining that movement pattern, we do the same thing with thought patterns.
Wow, yes.
We have this incredible muscle in our head that sometimes we forget gets trained with day in and day out through repetition. That's what we need, right? We need repetition and consistency to build the strength of something. But sometimes we don't realize we're building this, we're making those negative thought patterns stronger every time we feed into them.
I mean, there are so many great points to that. I think firstly, like the things that we think repetitively about ourselves and just in general, they make up who we think we are.
Who
So
we think we
essentially,
are.
you know, by thinking
Uh-huh.
like, oh, I'm falling, I tend to fall off on the weekends. That means you're the person who has a high calorie intake or whatever on the weekend. You are that person. That's what you
Mm.
currently believe. And so like
Mm-hmm.
changing that is like super, super difficult. And I think it's not just sometimes thoughts in the sense of words coming into your head, but from like pictures as well. So one
Oh
thing that
yeah.
I have realized in the past when I was like trying to go for a really heavy lift, for example, you know, not necessarily a 1 rep max squat, but like something really heavy. And in approaching the bar, the first video that would go through my mind would be me failing at that squat.
Mm.
And I was like,
Mm.
what am I doing? I'm like programming myself to miss this lift.
Yeah.
But I mean,
Yeah.
that was like the natural inclination, and having to like turning that around into a video where I'm like successfully standing up the lift, that took conscious effort, like consciously
Yes.
realizing, what am I actually doing? I can do this.
Right. Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. And you know what's interesting too about that is to say we can picture something in the gym because it's a physical act, but we don't
Mm-hmm.
realize. Well, you think of that as a movement pattern, but you don't realize that when we're eating, it's a movement pattern too,
True, yes.
right? How many of us technically it's less about what we're eating and more about how we're eating it,
Oh, yes.
right? Movement pattern. Let me tell you, before I barely even put my fork down. I did not want to drink any water because why would I do that? I might take up, what was it? I might take up space that food could go in there. Like, I don't know how, you know what I mean? Like something silly. I didn't realize that that's what I was doing, or I wasn't saying that out loud.
Mm-hmm.
But on the, you know, internally it was like, oh, I want to make more space for food.
Yes.
You know?
Yes.
And
And I think
we,
like the way we eat, absolutely, that's such a good point, because particularly nowadays, so many of us, including myself, oftentimes we eat distracted. Like I was just
Mhm.
talking about this the other day, like, you know, when you're on your phone, and then quite often, like I'd catch myself looking back at my plate and I'm like, oh, it's empty. Where did that go?
Where did
I'm
it
like, no, seriously,
go?
I thought I still had something left. And that just shows that I was not present whatsoever
Right.
when I
Yeah.
ate.
Exactly. And that is the piece that we forget about
Mm-hmm.
being present, right? You
Mm-hmm.
like that's right here, right now. Like it obviously happened, right? You ate it and it didn't just run away, you know?
Yeah.
But when we start to reconnect with like it really is about that mind body connection, you
Mm.
know? Because what's the it takes like 20 minutes for your stomach to signal to your brain that it's full.
Yes.
But if we're eating in 5 minutes, there's no, you know, it expands. It
Mm-hmm.
expands to make room. Are we able to check in with ourselves, to pause and breathe,
Mm-hmm.
right?
I
And
love that.
again, it's not necessarily like eating is not a language thing. I'm not like talking myself through eating, but it's the mental process of wait, what am I thinking about in this process? Do
Mm-hmm.
I have the time, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what we really are able to now start to recognize, or what we would hope to start to recognize, is when, in what situations, and am I asking my body to do this while I'm doing that,
Mm-hmm.
right? Rest and digest.
Mm.
Rest and digest. That's what we want our body to be in when we're eating so that we can
That's
properly take in all the goodness that we're eating, right? But
absolutely.
even if I'm eating the best nutrient dense meal, if I'm scarfing it down or eating it distracted, right? I'm asking my body to do something when I'm not in that physical state.
Mm-hmm. I
So how's
deeply
that going to
believe that a
impact me?
lot of digestive issues people have nowadays, or are just being reported more often nowadays, I do believe that a lot of them come back down to particularly that as well. I mean, not to say that there is nothing about in food tolerances
Exactly.
and stuff like that, but
Exactly.
particularly, you know, like IBS or SIBO and stuff like that, they're just
Mm-hmm.
exacerbated by people like eating too quickly, or even just being stressed in general. And I guess
Exactly.
the same way that you say, like, ask yourself, or what are you asking your body to do at the same time, same could be
Yeah.
said about exercise. You know, you go to the gym, you're probably like super exhausted, but you're just there because you know you should be, but
Right.
you fail to check in with yourself, thinking, how am I actually feeling today? Like, what would I enjoy? I think you
Right.
said a good point earlier when you were like, you loved swimming. Like, you know, like the enjoyment factor in exercise is so discredited nowadays. It's
Oh, for
like this is
sure.
good for you, this is bad for you. And people are like,
Mm.
well, but I love this.
Yeah.
Can I still do that? Yes,
Right.
heck yes.
Yes.
Maybe not all the time. Maybe if you're like the super endurance bunny, get yourself to do a little bit of strength training because you know it's good for you, kind of like, you know, brushing your teeth. Nobody really enjoys brushing your teeth, but some things you have to do because they're good for you.
Yeah.
But in the main thing is, you know, stick with what you enjoy also. Otherwise, you're not gonna do your
Exactly.
body any good either.
Exactly. And actually, that ties into one of the questions that you had asked about, that on my profile, I post on there that I'm a joy advocate,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that's part of like what this is all about, is like being able to recognize that I'm not able to be in joy and in stress at the same time, you
Mm-hmm.
know?
Mm-hmm.
And so it's not about being, joy. My Instagram account is Joyful Jenny, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's not about being joy 100,000% of the time and nothing else, right? It's like being able to recognize that there are moments of stress. There are moments of, what's going on with the current state of the world, and noticing and recognizing, like, man, there's some really tough things. And right now, what's gonna, like, how does me falling into the negativity trap impact my body? How am I able to actually show up and serve with my clients, the people that I'm able to connect with, if I'm really like dwelling in this thing? How does that affect my body? you
Yes.
know and it's not to dismiss anything.
No.
It's never to dismiss anything. It's to honor, like, man, this is tough, this is heavy, and right now, what's the one thing that I could do that's going to lead me towards just a little bit more joy, a
Oh, I
little bit
love that.
more,
I love
right?
that so much. I think, firstly, the notion of not discrediting feelings, emotions, like everything, it should be felt for sure. But just like you say, like talking about it more and more, how is that helping anybody? Focusing on that more and more, how is that helping anybody? What can you
Yeah.
do to improve things? But also just what can I focus on instead? Like what is
Hmm.
going good? I think sometimes when we are asked about our days or about how did your week go and so on, the first thing that pops to mind are the things that didn't go well, that you thought would go better or that you wanted to do better, but then even just acknowledging the small things that you consider perhaps as normal, or
Right.
that's nothing special, you kind of discredit that. And if you just focus on that, it can be a game changer. But I love that so much, what you
Yeah.
said.
Yeah, and one thing that I always want to highlight as well is the fact that you can look this up to say our brain and the way that us as humans, we actually have what's called a negativity bias. That even when we have the evidence to support, let's say, regardless of what's going on in the world, when you have evidence to support goodness going on in your life, the negative seems to outweigh the positive. It's not a one-to-one. It's not a one-to-one. It's actually, for every negative experience, you need 3
Oh,
positive
wow.
experiences to
Wow.
balance it out.
Yes, wow.
So that's to say, the person that chooses positivity actually has to work harder,
Mm.
because the negativity bias is what your body's primed, and it literally is a primal instinct.
Yes.
And so to choose to go into a different direction, right? And so with that, is you mentioned previously about the mental picture that you go into prior to a lift, right?
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that we like to share and to continue to evaluate now throughout your day is that our language, it influences our imagination,
Mm.
our feelings and emotions,
Mm.
and our physiology. So when you think about whatever you're saying, whatever words pay attention. What is the mental image that I'm painting? And is that giving me the chemical cocktail of feel-good hormones, or is it giving me the stress hormones?
Oh, totally. I
Right?
can so relate to that. Sometimes when I'm like, oh, I'm so busy, I notice myself almost shrinking myself together, or like I'm so stressed, or and
Right.
then you just get more. But then if you they have those weird studies, right, where they're like a Superman, a Superwoman pose, or even just smiling
Uh-huh.
for a minute, even if you don't feel like it, supposedly afterwards you feel much better, and just like
Right.
straightening up, it makes such a big difference.
Yeah. Being able to recognize that it is a feedback loop, right?
Mm-hmm.
What's going on in here? What's going on in your body? And how are you physically holding your body,
Mm-hmm.
right? That's why they say movement is medicine. Because movement could be the reverse effect. When you move, you're then creating the feel-good hormones to hopefully clear out what's going on in here, right?
Yes.
So it's definitely a feedback loop. When you're feeling low, right? Why is it when you're feeling low energy, you're likely wanting to be more right here? When you're feeling high, wow, all of a sudden I'm actually wanting to stand taller, right? I'm wanting to be up here. So it's definitely an interesting thing to start to recognize. How do my words influence my imagination? How does that then, because think about that. Imagination am I thinking here now in the present moment? Am I thinking about the past?
Yes.
Or am I thinking about the future? Where am I? I am here, but my thoughts are there.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Most of the time, somewhere different. That's so true.
Uh-huh.
I like that you specified that it's a feedback loop, because that means we can intersect it at any point in time. We can intersect it, as you say, with posture. We can intersect it with our thoughts, with our words. There's so many things. And quite often, the thing that we want to feel or achieve, if we put ourselves into that state first, like artificially, or like just like with self-affirmation and stuff like that, it's going to feel super fake at first. But the more you do it, and the more you essentially visualize that as the person that you want to be, that's when you do start becoming it.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, what's interesting is my husband and I were just having a conversation that I saw someone post, and I'm sure I've said this before too, but it was a post, and the first time that I saw it, and I was like, oh, wow, I saw it differently, where it started off to say, I'm not where I want to be, right? I'm not, there's two I's in there in that statement, right? I'm not where I want to be. And it's interesting to say that because there seems to be a disconnect between you and you.
Oh, yes.
I'm not where I want to be. I'm here, but I want to be there. Well, the cool thing about that is to say you recognize there is what we can call it, higher self, best self, whatever version of you. And you recognize too that, well, actually, if I'm not there, well, how can I get there? Right? And recognizing that like the way that we use our words can either create the image of the solution,
yes,
or we can focus on the problem.
True.
I'm not
You
where
can
I
find
want to
that
be.
eye or that eye, right?
Exactly.
Yes,
I'm not
yes.
where I want to be versus how can I get there? Right? I'm not where I want to be. How can I get there? Right?
I love it.
Paying attention to how your words are either narrowing down, right? You even said sometimes I feel here constrictive. I feel stuck, right? Think of times where you felt stuck. Well, can you move, right? Create the momentum, create the energy that you're looking for. And like you said, it can be at any points of that. Sometimes you can just shake it out, right? Shake it out. Force a laugh. Like, and it's an interesting thing to say, like, yeah, there's gonna be some people that's like, yeah, but that's fake. It's like, well, do you want me to stay here? Who is gonna benefit from me staying here?
That's
not
right.
me or anyone else.
That's so
you know
true. Yeah. No, I mean, that is exactly how I think we need to approach it more. And thankfully, like, more and more people are just seeing it as a whole picture. I think though, when you first, like, just like you, when I first went to university and stuff like that, I mean, you study exercise science or physiology, so you mostly focus on the physical side. They don't really say like, hey, by the
Uh-huh.
way, you should study, have a whole other degree in like what's going on in your mind, and
I
then combine the
know.
whole and stuff. But I'm super curious how you apply that nowadays, like with your clients. Like, do you, for example, with your movement coaching and stuff like that, how do you apply that?
Yeah, so really the big thing is being able to recognize that the mindset seeps into all aspects.
Mm-hmm.
So we start to really go into the awareness, right? Assess each of the different areas of your life and recognize how are the words that I'm using to describe whether it's my relationships, my relationship to myself, right? How I see my ability to show up and actually achieve this.
Mm-hmm.
Because once we are able to start having those conversations, we can recognize, you know what? The space in our brain is limitless.
Oh, yeah.
Right? You don't know where the story starts and stops. So a big part of this process is actually taking things and bringing it down into the real world, going from thought to physical representation of whatever the thing is. So what's the thing that my husband said? Breathe.
That's
He
awesome.
wrote me
Well,
a
I mean,
note.
another really good point for de-stressing and movement, both things very, very important. But I think it's so great that you're addressing these points with your clients, because quite often people don't ever even think about that. Like, where do I want to be? Or they're like, they know they want to get better or not feel the way that they currently feel, but like, how do I really want to feel? Or what are my limiting beliefs?
Yeah.
And subconsciously, most of us, or everybody has limiting beliefs, but most of us think like, oh, maybe I'm not good enough for that, or maybe I can't do
Right.
that. That's only for those kind of people, or
Oh,
like whatever
yeah.
it is, I'm too old for
Mhm.
this. And like, we all have something like this, and before you like just having to either put it down on paper or tell it to somebody or whatever, most people just don't necessarily take the time to think about that. So
Right. Well, actually, what's interesting is that you're so most people think about it, but it's playing in the background.
mhm,
You
mhm.
don't realize that that's playing in
Yes.
the background and affecting what
Yes.
you're doing. So
Yes.
really, it's more that we don't take the time to call it forward and say,
Mm.
yeah, this is what I'm thinking about. And the truth is that we dive into the inner critic.
Mm-hmm.
We dive into actually creating this character for your inner critic so that you can say, this is not me.
Mm.
This is mine. I named her Elizabeth. That's my middle name.
Oh, I
And
love
so
that.
whenever Elizabeth tries to yap, I'm like, oh, okay, I hear you. And what is it that you are asking of me?
I have
Right?
never heard that, like naming that person. That makes it so
Mm,
much, well, more personal and
yeah.
more actionable, because you can just be like, shut up, Elizabeth. Like, I don't want to hear you right now. Like, I know you're
Right?
fake. So,
Yeah,
right. Or,
right?
yeah.
Being able to
Love that.
recognize. And so what's interesting too is like to be able to actually take that step back and say, dang, like where did that actually come from?
Mm-hmm.
Because you learned that from either what someone once told you or even what you saw
Mm-hmm.
someone tell someone else.
Oh, yes.
Sometimes we're actually there's like a fear of achieving something because what will someone else think when I achieve that?
Absolutely. Like your friends, and they might not even say anything, but like you said, it might have been like a comment, or even your partner, or like, is it
Right.
going to destroy my current relationships, your son and
Mm-hmm.
safety? And like, there's so many rabbit holes that our thoughts can
Oh,
take us down to, for sure. So do
yeah.
you have like, for anybody who has been listening to like this, your amazing wealth of knowledge and joy, really, do you have a couple of like 2, 3 tips that they can take away from this and apply
Yeah.
to their own movement and mindset?
Definitely. Yeah. So one of the things that the very first time that I heard it, it created this moment of, huh, that's interesting. So I want you to think about when you hear this word, what's the first thing that you think about? When you hear abracadabra, what is it?
For me, it's basically magic appearing.
Yeah, magic, right? So the word translates to, or it's a phrase in Aramaic that translates to, with my words, I create.
Oh, cool.
Right? So one of the things that you can leave with from this moment moving forward is, what am I creating with my words?
Oh, wow.
Right? Am I creating conflict?
Mm-hmm.
Am I creating stress? Mm-hmm. Am I creating anxiety? Or am I creating strength and peace and ease and patience, right?
That is so cool. I'm literally getting goosebumps. This is really
Yeah.
cool.
And it's one of those things that it can be playful, right? And that's when you think about the learning experience, is that play makes it less scary, right?
Takes off
Be
some
playful
pressure.
with it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Be playful with it and recognize that when we start to approach it from a place of play, then you can give yourself a little bit less of that, like you said, pressure, right? Because we can definitely apply pressure with our language, right? And then what did we say? Pressure leads to stress. Stress, when accumulated too much stress, actually leads to breakdown.
Yes.
When all that we're doing and all that we're wanting to do in the gym is build up, right? Build up strength, resilience, right? And so can you take that moment to pause and say, okay, abracadabra, with my words, I create. And if I was just to generally assess, what am I creating with my words, right? And if you want to go further into the magic, right? Recognize that what are we doing when we're writing down? We're spelling. Right? We're casting spells. We're breaking spells. Right? You can grab your magic wand, right? And you can write those spells. What do you want? Right? What do you want? And recognize that once we start to bring it from here and write it down, you're far beyond what most people do. Because most people keep it up here. And they sit with it, and it goes and it goes and it goes. So when you're in that moment, can you bring it down, write it out, look at it, right? Literally just look at like, oh, wow, that's an interesting thought. Without judgment, say, what type of, what thought is that going to create? Is it going to create what I'm working towards, or away from that?
I love it. I love the without judgment, and yet when you write things down, sometimes it allows you to think or to see things more objectively, in the sense of, I'm really stressing out about my shirt being ruined and my daughter breaking my cup. Really? Why? Like, or you know, like something like that. And like when it's on paper, it just looks a little bit more, well, not ridiculous, but you know what I mean, like smaller perhaps. Yeah, right.
And not as big as what we can create in this space here, right? And so that, I would say, was a big shift that allowed me to see, right? And recognizing that with all of this, it takes time, it takes effort, it takes repetition, just like everything that we've been talking about. Right? Everything. Recognizing that we've had such a long time to practice speaking the way that we've been for so long, and start to create awareness around the fact that we inherit so much more than just our eye color from our parents. I want you, and I know this is beyond, you know, the nutrition and movement piece, but I want most people to hear this. A lot of us have said something like, I don't want to be like my parents, or I don't want to repeat what they've done, whether it's health-wise or other. But when you say that, you're painting a picture of what you don't want.
So if that's what you focus on.
Exactly, right? So instead of that honor, you can learn so much about what you do want from what you don't want. But just don't keep the focus on what you don't want. Start to shift. Well, if you don't want that, what do you want? And a lot of times there's a little bit of pressure when you go to answer that. Oh, wait, what do I want?
That's true. It's so much easier to think of all the things that you don't want than it is of the do.
That negativity bias, right?
Totally.
What do you want? What do you want? And start to answer it.
Love all of that. Honestly, I can only encourage anybody who's watching the replay or watching now to think about abracadabra, to put things on paper. And what I would also encourage you to do is to think of that inner critic. I love that, naming that inner critic and just realizing that it's, I mean, it's not two separate personalities, but it's like it's part of you, but it's the part of you that you shouldn't listen to.
Yeah,
So,
and being able to recognize what with that exercise,
mm-hmm.
right? Like you, if you want to take it upon yourself to go through that exercise, is write out the name of that you're going to name your inner critic. Write out all of the things that your inner critic says and how the inner critic makes you feel. But finish it and make sure you finish it with, if I keep listening to this inner critic, what will happen? That's the important part, to be able to create the shift.
Yes.
To say, you know what? Listening to you is a choice.
Yes. Yes.
You know? Yeah. And just like you said, the beliefs in there, they're made up of words. So what words are you using to describe those beliefs? Yeah. And recognize that beliefs are just thoughts that you keep thinking. Remember, we talked about strengthening those thought patterns. What happens in order to shift your movement? Let's say if you have a squat that you want to change the movement pattern. Well, first you got to stop doing the same thing.
It seems so obvious, but yes.
But it's hard. It's hard because the movement pattern has been ingrained, right? So remember that. Remember to connect with your body and to know that if we're looking for, gaining the best out of everything that we're putting into, is that really connecting and being able to say, how am I speaking to myself? And is that creating more stress than necessary?
Absolutely. I can't think of anything better to round this up with. And I just want to say thank you so much. Honestly, this has been one of the most amazing chats I've had with my guests on here. So thank you really for your time, for your joyful and positive energy that I can truly feel. And I know that anybody else who's watching that can as well. So
thank you.
It's been a true pleasure.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And if at any time that you want to reconnect, I'm so happy to do so.
Absolutely. And I'll put your Instagram tag and stuff in the comments, and I'll send you the replay for this as well. So
cool.
Yeah, it's been absolutely lovely, and I hope you have a nice weekend.
Thank you, you too. Bye. Bye.